So welcome everyone to our Building a Youth Community to Prevent Violent Extremism, Lessons from Urban South and Southeast Asia. This event is hosted by the Kofi Annan Foundation and its Extremely Together initiative. My name is Maud Rohr. I'm the Deputy Director for Programs at the Foundation, and I will be moderating the event today. On behalf of the Foundation and our project partners, I would like to extend the warmest of welcomes to all of you who are here today with us, but also those who are joining us online. So, over the next hour and a half, we will lead you through our 2-year journey, working alongside our partners to mobilize young people to prevent violent extremism. And with this, we really want to make the youth, peace and security agenda more concrete and practical. So our panelists will be sharing with us the strategies they've developed and some of the challenges that they faced as they have been supporting youth participation in peace-building efforts. Before we start, I would like to take a moment to thank the EU for their generous funding for this project. We are really grateful for FPI's support throughout these last 2 years. I would also like to thank our partners who have been successfully implementing this project despite everything that happened in the last 2 years. So these partners are Chris from the Philippines, Siad in Pakistan, GSURF and their local partner Rupantar in Bangladesh. And I would also like to thank Leader, who has been helping us put together this event today. Without further ado, I would like to invite our esteemed guest, Mr. Marc Fiedrich, to open this event. So Marc is the acting director and head of service for the Foreign Policy Instrument at the European Commission and head of the Stability and Peace Unit. Welcome, Marc.
Thank you very much, Maud, and welcome to all of you. It's a real pleasure to be with you here. It's certainly a treat to see people gathering in person again. I've just said as I was walking in that it's been probably about 4 or 5 years since I've last been in this room. And it is a pleasure to do so in the context of the Extremely Together initiative. And I want to thank, first of all, the Kofi Annan Foundation and its partners for having undertaken this very much needed work at a time when it's not easy to do this kind of work, as Maud was already alluding to. I always feel a little bit queasy when we speak about preventing violent extremism and youth at the same time. Because in some ways, youth is just the moment when you're supposed to be developing strong ideas. And that's what we do when we're young. When we're speaking about preventing violent extremism, we're speaking about a societal expectation about something that you're not supposed to do. When we speak about youth, we're speaking about breaking boundaries, not accepting boundaries, and wanting to go past those boundaries. And I think that's where there can sometimes be a tension when we come with preventing violent extremism programs that are well-intentioned and that are certainly needed in many parts of the world. But when it is larger society simply trying to put this on youth, it can't work. And that's where I think your work is extremely helpful, and I really want to appreciate the way that you have worked together with partners, the way that you have not only tried to bring youth in, but tried to give youth leaders a defining role in this project, and the way that you have tried to also pragmatically learn from others in this. And I think that is extremely important, not only from a perspective of preventing violent extremism, but also from a peace-building perspective writ large. because in a sense, peace building is also an activity where you cannot sort of rely on easy certainties. You need to bring a willingness to confront your own ideas and to move forward potentially with also positions that you might not agree with initially. And that is something where I think the work that you are doing now will not only help to prevent violent extremism, I hope it will in some contexts, but it will hopefully also help in terms of rooting peace, democracy, as we were just talking about before we started, more deeply in our societies. And therefore, look, they have quite a bit to bring also to other initiatives on this. The whole area of work of preventing violent extremism is one where pragmatism is really the watchword. I don't think anybody who tells you that they have a recipe for this should be listened to seriously. So I think the type of very pragmatic suggestions and recommendations that you have come up with is indeed what we need in this field. So thank you very much, and I wish you very good deliberations for this today. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think the point you raised about not imposing a too heavy burden on young people is really important, and I think we will discuss this further during the panel discussion. Before that, I would like to invite my colleague, Sophia Anton, to present about the project. Sophia is the program manager for the Youth and Peace programs at the Foundation, and she has also managed this 2-year project. So, Sophia, welcome.
Thank you, Maud, and good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here, and it feels a bit surreal even to be standing here alongside my colleagues and give a glimpse of what we have been doing for the past 2 years and what we can continue doing in the future. Even though we faced many obstacles since the project started in 2020, we have also seen a clear demonstration of the leadership that young people can have in their communities and the agency that they have in promoting positive action while societies are affected by the pandemic, natural disasters, and security challenges. And they have been shown also how to innovatively create different solutions to these challenges and adapt to the emerging context. And I would like to just start the presentation by giving you an overview of what Extremely Together is, and then go a bit more in detail about the project. So our Extremely Together initiative was started in 2016. It was founded by the Secretary General of the United Nations, former Mr. Kofi Annan, and he founded the Extremely Together initiative as a youth network to address the rising threat of violent extremism in the different societies. And we are pleased to have 2 of those original 10 young leaders, Ali and Arisa, with us here today. And I'm sure that they can share a lot of remarks from their experiences from the past years. Then locally, we have been expanding this global youth initiative to more local action by testing first a chapter model in Somalia and Uganda. And then Extreme Together has been working for the past 2 years in South and Southeast Asia with the financial support of the European Union to establish youth networks in urban areas of Pakistan, the Philippines, and Bangladesh due to the recent increasing recruitment of middle-class educated young people to different violent extremist groups. And as part of this project, Leading the Way to Peace, Youth Together for Social Cohesion, the aim was to train and inspire young people across cities to take concrete action to PVE, and regionally also bring young people, leaders, civil society organizations, and regional experts together for sharing and learning. And between 2020 and 2022, CAF and its partners, Siad, Chris, GSURF, and Rupantar, trained over 2,700 young people and supported the implementation of around 60 youth-led initiatives, projects, and campaigns over 10 cities. In parallel, we also came together regionally with over 30 organizations, 60 young people and regional actors to draw on the experiences of this project and consolidate inspiring practices from different experiences that are taking place in the region, to also understand better what works and then what doesn't work when engaging young people for building peace and for preventing violent extremism in the different regions of South and Southeast Asia. And these are some of the experiences that can also go and be very valuable across different regions. They are not only specific to what is happening in South and Southeast Asia. So what have we learned? The findings of this regional project are consolidated in the Building Peace Together guide. And I make a small pause here. All of you in the room, you might have already next to you a blue executive summary of the publication. And also you can digitally access the full guide with the QR code that is on the last page of the document. And we also have hard copies of the full guide available, the orange ones. And for those who are following the live stream, you can find the document available on the Foundation's website under the Extremely Together initiative. So from this guide and our experience, I would like to highlight 3 points that we considered worked well and are valuable when fostering youth-led preventing violent extremism. First, what became evident during this process of facilitating peer learning, first among the project partners and then among dozens of other local and regional youth and PV actors, is that there is a need for spaces, sharing and support networks at the sub-regional, regional and cross-regional levels. These connections enable bonding and friendships between young people and peace practitioners, and foster their sense of belonging to something bigger beyond their communities. And also they provide a sounding board for their ideas, provoking innovation and new perspectives that at best can help to refine strategies and approaches to youth engagement and PV action. And my second point is about mobilizing and engaging young people in PVE. Throughout the diverse activities, our local partners strive to make PVE attractive to the urban youth. So first they gave them a how-to through training, and then liberty to design their own projects to build social cohesion, and liberty to also be the leaders of peace in their communities. And by showing that PVE can be relatable and fun, for example, through recreational activities, a topic that sometimes might sound a bit technical or become also too sensitive to engage in, suddenly is more approachable, and not only for the youth, but also for their immediate communities. And for this, we also went beyond working with the usual suspects and collaborated with community and social media influencers, journalists, and artists, athletes, and other role models who can trigger young people's interest and motivate them to participate. And this leads me to my third point. After the how-to comes why-to. So after motivating young people to join the network, the next step is to find a way to keep them motivated to stay and be engaged in the action. Because as we know, building peace takes time, it takes patience, and it's a long-term commitment. Young people juggle with many responsibilities like school, employment, and family. And a crucial point is to ensure their safety and financial and mental well-being, which together constitute a broader concept of offering youth initiatives and incentives that can encourage them to participate, but also alleviate some of the difficulties they might be facing simultaneously. Whether financial or non-financial, these should cater positively to the specific needs and conditions of the participating youth, like opportunities to participate in decision making, having access to mentorship or internships, practical resources, increased visibility, safe spaces, and accompaniment. So how can we continue supporting youth engagement in PVE? We have consolidated recommendations in the executive summary, and I will briefly mention a few of them. Based on our experience and research, PVE efforts should not only focus on the low-income rural youth, but also on urban, well-educated and middle-class young people. And in the 3 countries where we worked, we found urban youth to be increasingly targeted by violent extremist groups, and also especially online. So for example, in Bangladesh, 80% of the young people are recruited through different digital platforms. At the same time, young people remain excluded from PVE efforts, despite being a key in exerting influence and reach among their peers when it comes to preventing different types of violence in their communities. And as more and more people are concentrating in cities, and young people represent a significant proportion of the population, not only in Asia, but also in Africa, urban youth should be included in defining what could peace building look like and supported in leading these efforts in their communities. Strengthening initiatives to prevent violent extremism requires also increased flexibility and long-term support from donors. Changing behaviors and attitudes takes time. And also young peace builders, often surrounded by traditional and hierarchical contexts, are faced with diverse social pressures and resistance for doing something different and new. And we need to make sure that they are accompanied and that support structures are available within their countries and communities. And here we play an important role as international actors in facilitating these kind of structures and platforms. And finally, as we move forward, we need to continue striving for a comprehensive PVE approach. It includes understanding and acting on the interconnected and compound challenges the communities are facing. And to name a few, these can be disinformation and digital media, cybersecurity, as we have seen in the Philippines and in Bangladesh recently, environmental problems and climate vulnerability, as well as mental health. So I look forward to the enriching discussions we will be having today. And once more, I would like to reiterate and really thank our financial partner, the European Union, for their support throughout this project, and especially Marc Fiedrich for being here today with us, and our local partners for the efforts to build a more just and peaceful world. Thank you.
Thank you, Sofia. So now that you have a better idea of what we have been doing over the past 2 years, I would like to invite our distinguished panelists to come to the stage. So Candida Novak-Honakova, policy officer at the mediation support team at the EAS. Please have a seat. Natasha Skartgaard, Global Youth Advisor at the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome. Syed Ali Abbas, our Extremely Together leader from Pakistan and also the campaign manager for this project in Pakistan. And last but not least, Arisa Nokum, president of CRIS, our partner organization in the Philippines and Extremely Together leader. So a warm welcome to all of you. It's a real pleasure to have you. So this panel will be divided into 2 parts. With the first part, we want to look into existing good practices in how to engage young people in peace and security efforts. And then we will move to the second part, which will be about what remains to be done, what more can be done about it. So let's start with this broad question about what does it take to engage youth in peace and security. And I would like to start with you, Arisa, because we keep talking about youth, peace and security, but actually young people are not a homogeneous group. And with this project, you have been focusing on urban young people. And could you tell us why it was important to work with this particular segment of the youth population and how you identified those to engage in the activities?
Thank you so much, Maud, and thank you so much to everyone who's here today. Well, the problem of violent extremism in urban youth has really been intensified, honestly, in the recent years, and especially in our context in South and Southeast Asia. We're seeing wide inequalities in urban populations. You know, in Manila right now, you can see Rolls Royces in the street, but then you see so many more slum populations occupying areas that are known as hot seats of not only criminality, but also even the hideouts of extremist elements. We're also seeing extrajudicial killings and injustices being committed upon a lot of young people in these urban areas, which is also an ingredient that exacerbates violent extremism. And we're seeing also the isolation of a lot of young people who have left their homes, living in urban cities or away from their families. And I think that also makes them very vulnerable to getting recruited by violent extremist groups. But beyond the focus on urban youth that we had on our project, what was really important as well was understanding how young people perceived violent extremism in the first place. So in the case of Extremely Together in this project, we conducted baseline studies which helped us understand how they perceived violent extremism and what the context of violent extremism was really for them. And honestly, the way they felt it was a revelation. They said that a lot of young people felt more vulnerable than others. So you had women, for instance, young women, out of school youth, children of former combatants, or even children who've come into contact with violent extremist organizations who felt most vulnerable. And that's why in our projects, we made sure that women were very well represented and that some of these marginalized groups were also well represented. And another thing we found out in our baseline studies that recruitment to violent extremist groups happen online. So we really wanted to invest a lot in online interventions on PVE through Extremely Together.
Thank you. Ali, in Pakistan, you have been more specifically working with young people from ethnic and religious minorities. How easy was it to engage them in the activities? Also, I wonder about the whole PVE concept. Are there sensitivities around it in Pakistan? And did you need to adapt the activities to the specific needs and priorities of this minority youth?
First of all, yes. I think marginalized communities are impacted disproportionately more by violent extremism, and that's why their inclusion within any kind of PVE movement is very important. If you deal with the threat that especially religious minority communities in the context of Pakistan are facing, you improve the overall PVE situation, you know. So what we had to do was we initially started a community mapping exercise all over the country, and this mapping exercise included stakeholders that we wish to be included in our PVE work. And these included people from gender minorities, from religious minorities, from ethnic minorities. And then we had to handpick them and train them through our capacity building workshops and give them the stage and ask them to lead creative campaigns that they feel can voice out their concerns with the broader national audiences. Besides that, I think it is also very important to assert that, generally speaking, youth are bracketed into this huge segment, like young people from ages 16 to 30. Now that is 80 million people in Pakistan. You know, that doesn't really help. There should be a gradation and more nuanced approach of what the real target audience is, what are the income brackets, you know, what religious background, do they come from a privileged background or a middle class background or a low income background, etc. And I think that was very important because we realized during the mapping exercise that the basic human aspirations of the distant segments of youth were different. elite youth would have would watch different movies. They would watch Netflix. They would have different pop culture symbols, you know, different aspirations and trends. And similarly, middle class and the lower middle classes would have different entry points that influence their worldviews. And that was very important. Also saying that mapping trends within the broader youth segment are not very difficult because they're mostly online. So just a bit of online research maps trends that are being used by youth audiences. Second, I think, Maud, flexibility of structures. Having a very dynamic structure that incorporates these evolving needs and aspirations of young people is very important. So never being very stringent about it. In Pakistan, we had a National Leadership Council announced, but this council was voted in. And then this council decided what the emerging needs were of the minority and the majority communities, and that's how we were very, very flexible. And it kind of built ownership. They acknowledged that we are listening to them, yeah, and that really, I guess, helped us. The third point is that there was a learning mechanism that was very important. Things are changing very quickly in the modern world. We had COVID. I mean, the project started just before COVID, but just before the first event, there was a global pandemic that no one had heard of. And we had to adapt very quickly. And that the learning exercise that we did on a quarterly and a biannual basis fed back to our M&E frameworks, to our, you know, basic frameworks that met our objectives. So I guess that really helped us build a very emancipatory kind of a movement that is now perhaps the most visible PVE movement in the country.
And can you just elaborate a little bit about engaging this minority youth, just because they may not be used to being participating in some of these activities, and were there specific strategies, or was it easy for them to open up and express the specific challenges that they face?
It is, I think the expectation that they will open up initially is very wrong, because they have gone through a systematic structural violence. But we included them in the start, knowing that when they build rapport and when we build relationships with them, they will, you know, take a more active role. And that's exactly what happened. Initially, during our meetings, workshops, they wouldn't really speak up because they're in the room with majority community youth, you know. But eventually, now 2 years on, 6 out of 11 National Leadership Council members of ET Pakistan are minority youth, you know. And they are doing campaigns. 3 of them are, by the way, contesting elections whenever we have general elections in this year or the next. So I guess that was a huge transformative intervention with them. They used to operate at a neighborhood level in their own slums and low-income settlements, but now they will be given tickets by mainstream parties and will be contesting elections. So that's a huge achievement on part of Extremely Together.
Picking up on Ali's point about the need for flexibility and to really adapt to the changing youth priorities, I'd like to ask also Candida and Natasha about it. From a donor's perspective, working with young people come with specific challenges. You know, they don't necessarily are aware of funding opportunities, for instance. They don't necessarily have the information. They may not have the right structure, the right bank account, the numbers of years of experience that are often required. And I think an additional challenge comes from the fact that in many places where we work, the shrinking space for civil society is really a reality, and this leaves young people even more excluded because they already face multiple obstacles to their participation in society. So what experiences do you have, and how can programming and policy engagement be responsive to this increased need for support and flexibility?
Thank you, Marc. Let me take a bit of a broader look at the issue, because I come from the European External Service, the Directorate for Integrated Approach to Security and Peace. That means that we deal with issues, including youth issues,
in a broad manner. I must say that it's really good for us to hear the results of projects like these, because we get the real feedback from the ground, which is then feeding into our policy work. Looking at the youth issues in general, obviously, like Marc said at the beginning, we try to look at the potential of young people and get better and in using that potential for long-term sustainable peace. When we start with conflict analysis, which is actually the backbone of our EU programming in conflict and fragile countries, we often find that young people are at disproportionate risk of violent conflict, or on the other side, like what you're trying to aim at, of being led to violence by charismatic leaders, especially in situations where there's a lack of educational or employment opportunities. So when we have this analysis, we try to give recommendations of preventive actions, some of which your colleagues have already talked about. The EU programming is guided by conflict analysis, as I said, also the EU values in general. So we don't promote youth inclusion and youth engagement only at multilateral fora. We bring it down to our development cooperation with third states. Now there's a big difference between youth engagement at a local level and, for example, something that my division works on, peace processes and mediation efforts. Trying to include youth in formal track 1 peace processes is extremely difficult still, but we recognize the challenge and we are working on it. The EU has been building capacity of young people around the world for years. In specifically on conflict prevention, we have, for example, trained early warning monitors, or supported peer-to-peer approaches, or to prevent electoral violence. We have supported youth wings, dialogue between youth wings of political parties. That kind of approach and support has been given. In regards to the bigger peace processes, of course, the international community has recognized for some time now that youth inclusion, and not only youth inclusivity in general of peace process makes them much more sustainable. So we are trying to address them. For example, young people can be a really good link between the formal and informal community level about the peace process, which again makes it more legitimate, whatever outcomes there are. So apart from trying to promote the idea of or promote youth engagement, inclusivity into peace processes, we also recognize that we have a challenge, in the EU institutions themselves. We are working on raising awareness to the YPS agenda and issues. Also, we do recognize that there's a need of trainings of relevant colleagues and staff members who are dealing with these issues. But there's a long way forward. So we're very happy with the results that you have achieved through your projects.
Thank you. Natasha.
Yes, last but not least, and I hope you can all hear me clearly. May is really not a good month for allergies. But my name is Natasha, and I work in the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs as Global Youth Advisor, which very simplified means that my role is to look at basically everything we do within development policy, security policy, foreign policy, and how can we mainstream meaningful youth participation through all those pillars. So, easy fix. But in terms of Denmark and kind of highlighting a few examples, I'd also like to start a bit more broadly, because for Denmark, our key principle is doing development with, by, and for youth, which kind of highlights how we see young people as partners and not just as beneficiaries. And I think that's a very, very important nuance in everything you do when it comes to program and working together with young people. And secondly, whenever it comes to focusing and working with young people, and as been mentioned before, you know, young people is not just one big group. We have the biggest youth generation in history, but it's spread out in so many different avenues with so many different backgrounds, marginalized groups, different cultures, different backgrounds. It has to be a choice and a priority because it takes time. Denmark started almost 6 years ago, 5 years ago now, really specifically choosing youth as a priority within our development cooperation. And we're still working on how to actually implement a lot of our programs because mainstreaming a focus on youth and how to respond to young people and working with young people on local level, it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes resources. And that's something you as a donor really have to be willing to give and be in it for the long term. This is not a short-term development priority. It has to be in it for the long term. In terms of Denmark as an example, for us, for example, our development cooperation is very decentralized, which means, yes, a lot of decisions and funding decisions are, you know, the overall funding decisions are made in Copenhagen, but the actual program development, program implementation, monitoring, evaluation happens at our embassies, which means that when we decide that youth is a priority and when we decide, for example, youth, peace and security should be a policy focus, well, then it's not just me or you know, the Africa department at the capital level that has to, you know, we can think it's a good idea, but we actually have to work together with all our embassies on how to actually implement that into programming. So for us, it has to be kind of a whole of system approach because we have to get so many different people on board in practice. And for example, in terms of youth, peace and security, it sounds niche. And to a lot of donors, especially in EU, to us, also Denmark, before we kind of realized we have to get on this, it sounds like a super niche agenda, but it's not. When you look at the different pillars and the different P's, yes, it's a security agenda, it's a peace-building agenda, but it's also a socio-economic agenda, it's a partnership agenda, it's a participation agenda. So when it comes to kind of realizing how you as a donor can work with it, it's about finding your approach. The Nordic countries in general, we're very happy with YPS and working on different policy levels, but we're also having very different approaches to it because it depends on where we are on policy and program level. And also in terms of going from policy to practice, I mean, it's not easy. It's really, really not easy. And then going from practice to implementation and implementation to monitoring, it's not easy at all. And what we did was that we developed a toolkit for internal use. It's called Youth in Development, and it's not just focused on YPS. YPS, there's a guidance note on YPS and how to include that in our programming, but it's really in general, how do we approach working with young people in our programs on national level in different national contexts at our embassies. So when we do bilateral country programs, how do we ensure that young people are actually meaningfully involved? For example, by establishing youth sounding boards or youth panels at our embassies. We have it in Kenya, we had it in Ethiopia, Uganda, Mali. Really, we've highlighted priority embassies where we kind of piloted this practice, and it has really, really worked. Some places, it has also been a severe challenge, and it does not always work on ground, and that's where we kind of have to take a few steps back and evaluate, because again, embassies here play a major role, and if they don't understand, and if we from capital level have not done a good enough job at kind of training and working with them, explaining how to work with young people, and not just how, but also why it's important to work with youth organizations on different levels who are, as has been said before, you know, not necessarily always the most structures or have the most resources. It's also the employee volunteer relation, you know, there are so many different aspects here that we have to be able to take care of on local level. And that's something that we're continuously focusing on. Right now, we have a very strong focus on implementation. We've done a lot of policy development, but for that to actually make a difference and make an impact, we have to look at how do we implement it and how have we worked with it with the past few years and take stock of that, learn from successes, learn from failures, because there are quite a few of those as well, and then how do we adapt and how do we push that implementation as well. And maybe, you know, final remark on that, in terms of what can be done, a lot more can be done on policy level, on program level, looking at, you know, the YPS agenda in general. I mean, there are now 3 resolutions, the first one and the second one and the third one, so many nuances in this to work on, calling for national action plans, for example, on the agenda. And for, as far as I know, in the EU, it's only Finland who has a national action plan, and I think on global level, it's only Finland and Nigeria. So, you know, there's room for potential, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Ali and Arisa, do you have any brief reactions to what we just discussed? Are there any other challenges that you had to navigate during this project that you would like to highlight?
Well, I'd like to highlight something positive and something negative about working with the government. So in working with both the national and local government on PV and youth, to be honest, we've received some pushback. Because when we say that we're working on preventing violent extremism in the Philippines, it's recognizing that there is a serious case of violent extremism in the Philippines, and to some extent, the government maybe feels that it hasn't done its job successfully or completely enough. In fact, I've been in forums along with Philippine delegations who've, you know, have chastised me for saying, why are you saying this? Why are you saying that there's war? Why are you saying that these are the number of casualties? You know, it's not something that you want to expose to the world. But even with the pushback and even with the fact that sometimes youth activists, youth organizations are being targeted by the government or are being even harassed in some cases because it is felt that youth organizations sometimes run opposite to the government or are critics of the government. The positive is that there are a lot of local government agencies, there are a lot of staff from government agencies and local government units that are very, very serious about working with youth on violent extremism. We've done work with local mayors who've given us so many things for free, you know, free use of the venue, free use of their vehicles for our programs, a lot of other benefits because they know how serious the problem of violent extremism is and because they know that young people really have to play a part in addressing the cases of violent extremism in our respective contexts. And I think in relation to what Candida and what Natasha have said, there's a lot of policy building going on here on this level, on the EU level, and the foreign ministries level, and the multinational level. But we need to get that to our countries, to our governments, to our states, because they do know these things, but sometimes they don't understand how important it is, or sometimes they're not being called accountable enough to actually implement all these things that we're talking about, the YPS, our peace agendas, and action plans. So I think we at Extremely Together will, of course, help in doing that. But I guess this is something that I ask from everybody here in this room and listening, you know, that we need to hold our governments accountable, our state leaders accountable, especially in the context now of states themselves being the sources of terror, or being the sources of hate speech, or being the sources of disinformation and violent propaganda.
Should I?
Sure.
Okay. There were so many challenges. I mean, I was thinking what challenge to pick, you know. I think the fundamental challenge is the way PV interventions are designed. I think it's a design challenge, how to frame it, because PV or violent extremism is such a multi-dimensional and such a cross-cutting theme in itself. For example, we didn't know that public health would intersect with PVE due to the pandemic, that previously nobody thought about it, that there would be a pandemic and how it would aggravate hate speech in certain contexts. It did. There was a lot of hate speech against minority communities in Pakistan during the pandemic because extremist organizations could not rally on the ground, and they would take their frustration out on Twitter and Facebook, And how these different fields intersect with violent extremism is something that makes it a very serious design challenge that requires robust research and, of course, policy intervention and, of course, deliberation with a broad range of stakeholders: economic, cultural, social, religious, political scientists, social scientists, even mental health experts. Because even in our program at ET Pakistan, young people were going through such a traumatic experience of at times witnessing violence, and also due to the pandemic that they went through, really bad mental stages. And we felt we were not equipped well enough to design an intervention that would address their mental well-being and also issues of violent extremism. So to me, after 13 years of practice on the ground, let me tell you this, it's still a fundamental design challenge. The way PVE intervention should be designed at the state level, at the donor level, or at the ground level. There should be some serious deliberations. It should, of course, be bottom-up. It shouldn't be, totally top to bottom. But it should include a broad range of actors. For example, many donor agencies I see invest in social welfare projects like education or health or menstrual hygiene, or climate change. Of course, all of these issues intersect with violent extremism as well. But the funding stream for, let's say, education does not cater for PV interventions and all of that. So the common ground between these fields should be immediately deliberated. We should have a more robust design because we have experimented with many kinds of designs all over the world. And I think that will really impact the way we frame and look at PV work on the ground.
Thank you very much. I think your experience have really helped contextualize what can be sometimes an abstract debate about youth inclusion. So thank you very much for that. So before we move to the second segment of the panel, I would like to share with you a short video that was filmed during the project. It is about making PVE an attractive cause for young people. And this video is the first episode of a 3-part series that we are going to use for training purposes in the future with young people. And it really tried to showcase different ways in which youth are involved in PVE in the 3 countries where we've worked. I will just move away from, I think I'm on the way to the screen.
Extremely Together is a youth-led initiative by the Kofi Annan Foundation. Region. This experience has brought us a lot in terms of lessons, new insights, and advice to share. This is episode 1 of Building Peace Together, a video toolkit series designed to help young change makers like you make a difference in your community.
I'm Marc. I'm an advocate, at the same time advocate of peace here in Mindanao. At the same time, I'm situated here in Tagum City in the Philippines.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sadia Srita. I'm a youth leader from Dhaka, Bangladesh.
मेरा नाम सिप्ती हसन है और मेरा लाहौर से ताल्लुक़ है। थिएटर एक्टर हूँ, थिएटर डायरेक्टर हूँ और फिल्म मेकर हूँ और इसके अलावा पॉलिटिकल एक्टिविस्ट हूँ।
ইউনিভার্সিটি লাইফের প্রথম থেকে আমারও বিভিন্ন ধরনের বায়াসনেস ছিল। যেমন মাদ্রাসা স্টুডেন্টদের প্রতি আমার এমন ধরনের ধারণা ছিল যে তারা বিভিন্ন ভায়োলেন্ট অ্যাক্টিভিটিসে জড়িয়ে পড়ে, কিন্তু নর্মাল যারা জেনারেল লাইনে পড়ে তারা কোনো ভায়োলেন্ট অ্যাক্টিভিটিসে জড়ায় না। তাছাড়াও বিভিন্ন ধর্মাবলম্বী যারা আছে তাদের প্রতিও আমার কিছুটা বায়াসনেস ছিল। তাদের থেকে আমি বেশি দূরে থাকতাম বা বেশি মিশতাম না, এবং এইসব কারণে আমার মধ্যে তাদের প্রতি একটা নেগেটিভ ধারণা ক্রিয়েট হওয়া শুরু করে। বাংলাদেশে হলি আর্টিজান রেস্টুরেন্টের মধ্যে যে ইনসিডেন্টটা হলো, সেটার পর থেকে আমার একটু ডিফারেন্টভাবে চিন্তা করা শুরু করলাম। কারণ সেখানে আমি দেখেছি কোনো মাদ্রাসা স্টুডেন্ট ছিল না, প্রাইভেট ইউনিভার্সিটি স্টুডেন্টরা ছিল, এবং তারা সবাই ওয়েলদি ফ্যামিলির ছিল। তখন আমি শুরু করি ডিফারেন্টভাবে চিন্তা করা, আমার বায়াসনেসটাকে একটু চেক করে দেখা যে আমি ঠিক আছি কিনা।
लाहौर में जिस तरह हमने वॉल ग्राफ्टी की, उसमें हमने थिएटर परफॉर्म किया, उसमें हमने पीस वॉक की, और इसी तरह हमें कराची में, इस्लामाबाद में और दूसरे मुख्तलिफ शहरों में हमें मुख्तलिफ एक्टिविटीज़ देखने को मिली। और उसके बाद ये जर्नी आगे बढ़ी और इन तमाम उसमें से जो नौजवान इकट्ठे हुए, जो एक्टिविस्ट इकट्ठे हुए, उनमें से एक यंग लीडरशिप प्रोग्राम बनाया गया।
We really cater our minorities and majorities group because they have the ideas, and at the same time they have this mindset of giving individuals to have a holistic environment and advocating peace, preventing violent extremism. So kung ni-welcome natin sila, binibigyan natin sila ng enough platform, at the same time we are catering individuals to be part of these advocacies, malalaman natin kung ano yung mga different ways, ang mga different platforms na gagamitin natin to really advocate for preventing violent extremism.
Okay, so now let's focus on what more can be done to ensure the meaningful inclusion of young people. Let's start with you, Candida. So the European Union has been taken several steps recently, like the establishment of the youth sounding board, the appointment of the youth advisor, and also you are working on this youth action plan. And could you tell us about how the youth action plan will ensure young people's meaningful participation and also support their participation in decision making?
Thank you, Maud. That's a hard question. You know, we are specifically on the youth action plan. We are currently working on it. We are literally drafting it these weeks. As you can imagine, it's a broad process, bureaucratically speaking. But it will be a plan for an action plan from this year until 2027. And the aim is to develop the external dimension of our youth policies and ensure meaningful inclusion of young people in and their full participation in all levels of society, in economic and political life. We are aiming at releasing the action plan sometime in the fall. And one of the challenges actually that we're facing during the drafting process is how to integrate the YPS agenda into the action plan, because you can imagine the action plan covers all sorts of areas from education, from youth mobility, employment, peace and security, obviously, preventing violent extremism, health, all that. Trying to get young people to connect it, to empower them and engage them, through participatory approaches. So it's going to be quite a big plan, and it forces us, the EU officials, to look at really what we can do, because obviously the action plan needs to be realistic and implementable. So we are really working on that. I hope we will have some good successes, and we hope to be held accountable, I should say. Because there are so many strategies and so many plans, but we need the civil society to tell us where the implementation gaps are. I should say also that this year is the European Year of Youth, and it really helps in promoting the youth issues and working on the YPS, because at this time there are so many other challenging priorities that the European Union is facing. So it's something that we're actually happy and proud of. On the policy level, specifically, internally, we have something called the EU Peace Mediation Guidelines, and we are revising them this year. And we have decided to include a special section on youth inclusion into mediation efforts of the EU mediation support as well. We are designing specific trainings on YPS. I mentioned that we realized there was a lack thereof for relevant stuff, including for the EU pool of mediators, where we have achieved full gender balance, gender equality. But also, for example, for the EUSRs, who often have a role in formal peace processes, so they need to be equipped with the knowledge, with the capacity to handle the youth inclusion issues. Apart from that, the Director General for International Partnerships has launched the Youth Sounding Board for their programs, and we are again very, very happy with that development. We in the EAS have appointed focal points, youth focal points in all EU delegations, and there's about 140 of them in the world. So these people are not only looking at a situation, let's say, of the youth in those countries, but they're also the entry points for youth organizations, for trying to cooperate somehow with the European Union delegation, or through programming, or through let's say political dialogues. But because that's actually, I wanted to comment on one of Ariza's earliest point, that we try to, on the shrinking space of civil society, one of the ways we try to address that is through our political dialogues with third countries. It's not so easily done through programs. Lastly, perhaps on the YPS national action plans. Yes, we are very proud of Finland, I must say, to be the leader on this file. And we are ready to work with other EU member states who take the decision to adopt a national plan. We are also ready to work with other third countries who choose to take the path. Hopefully, there will be more following suit, and we might have further activities in this regard going forward.
Thank you, Natasha. So Denmark has recently adopted a new foreign policy strategy that has a strong youth focus. And I think you have also been working on how to integrate the youth peace and security agenda into this strategy. Could you tell us how it will translate into Denmark's support to youth efforts locally?
Yes, indeed. So we adopted a new development cooperation strategy almost a year ago, June 2021. which has a strong youth focus. Luckily, that's not really anything new because our previous development cooperation and humanitarian strategy really laid the foundation on how we focus and work with youth, mainstreaming it across the different pillars. So this is just building on that, which is really, really nice, because the important aspect of the Danish development cooperation strategy is that it's always adopted with broad parliamentarian approval, which means it's been negotiated, negotiated. So the final result is really with full backing or almost full backing from Parliament, which creates a very, very strong foundation for our ministry, but also our ministers to act on. In terms of maybe just starting in a bit other direction, so Denmark has long had a very strong policy focus on youth, but also youth, peace and security, looking at, we've been funding UNDP, JPO positions, UNDP reports, the Missing Peace report, we've been working closely with Graham Simpson, we've been funding AU also because looking at Africa as a continent, a regional context, been funding part of the AU YPS work, the UN Youth Strategy, which also has a YPS focus, EU Council conclusions, which are actually the foundation for the upcoming Youth Action Plan. We're also working following very closely with the Youth Action Plan, and we're very, very excited to see when the first draft or the final draft will arrive. And we've also been very involved in that process as well. But then again, going from policy to program and actually implementing, that has been kind of the turn phrase for us. We, as I mentioned before, we have the toolkit we developed a few years ago, also focusing on YPS, and specifically how do we capacity build our embassies and our program development officers to actually integrate a youth focus. And you mentioned it before, the science challenge. That's really a key word here, because too often when we look policy processes, program processes, budget processes, we have a tendency, and when I say we, I say institutions, member states, governments, we have a tendency to invite young people maybe at the end of the process, maybe if they're lucky in the middle of the process, a consultation meeting, or maybe, they can be part of evaluating. But what we really need to look at is, well, before we even start that process, we have to invite young people into the room so they can be part of designing the process. It's about co-development, co-creation, co-management. And that's really something I think is a big potential for us, for sure, as Denmark, still, but looking at institutions, looking at member states and how to work with young people, that's really, really keywords. Coming back to the strategy, we have a section on meaning for youth participation, and really looking at how, because when you're looking at the youth agenda, the youth field, it's super dynamic. What was really the key phrase or the narrative a year ago is different today. So that's something you also really have to be aware of as a donor. It's super dynamic, it keeps developing. So how you focus and how you work with youth has to be flexible. It has to kind of follow the narrative of the youth agenda. And for our strategy, I think it is very simply 2 or 3 sentences about how young people are important when it comes to peace building, when it comes to preventing violent extremism, and how young people are key partners in fragile circumstances. It doesn't really say much more than that, but it's a key phrase, and it's been approved by Parliament, it's been approved by politicians, which means it's now really a political standpoint for Denmark, which is really important for us and me as a policy officer and program officer, because then that's something I can now work on implementing. And specifically how we're looking at doing that right now is, well, we have our youth sounding boards, we have our bilateral country programs. We're taking stock of that now, not the programs per se, but the sounding boards, and what has worked and what hasn't worked, and how can we then improve that. Also because part of our policy strategy, or our development cooperation strategy, is that we really want to be in fragile areas. And for us, that's mainly Africa. At this point, we have a very strong African focus. And if we want to be in fragile areas and fragile regions in Africa, looking at Africa, it's you know, I think 19 out of the 20 youngest in terms of population countries are located in Africa. There's a huge youth population that we also as a donor have to work with. And that comes back to flexibility in funding, networks, youth organizations, really looking at local level on the ground, who are the relevant partners for our embassies in terms of implementing the programs. And those would be youth networks, youth organizations in different contexts. And secondly, we're also now looking at a peace and stabilization program for the Horn of Africa, so a regional peace and stabilization program. And we're very literally in the drafting process right now, where youth, peace, and security for the first time will also be a part of that stabilization effort and policy program for the entire region of the Horn of Africa. So that's yeah. I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Going to Pakistan. So with this project, you have built a huge network of young peace activists. So what's next? What are your plans to make youth inclusion a greater reality, building on this basis that you have been building?
Maud, first of all, I would like to share my experience of when youth are included in, let's say, ground level work, and when they're included in policy work. These are two different streams. Often we have noticed that youth who get a seat on the table for the policy dialogues are not really activists working on the ground, and vice versa, the people who are really good activists on the ground do not have the kind of framing and diplomatic mannerism to, you know, represent the community at a policy dialogue. So our challenge was, when we were working with marginalized communities, was to build their capacities good enough so they can speak for themselves. I am no one to speak for a minority community in Pakistan. You know, youth from those communities should be speaking up from themselves, and that was a challenge that we overcome through our capacity building workshops and through mentorship that we provided throughout the 2 years. And now we have successful running chapters in 4 important urban centers of Pakistan, and we wish to expand horizontally, as into more cities, and also vertically, having more lobbying activities with the Parliament of Pakistan. The PV policy is being drafted. For the last 6 years it is being, but now we are hearing that it is on the final stages, and there is no youth component. Youth consultations did not take place. The National Action Plan to counter terrorism, no youth consultation took place, you know. So, and by the way, Pakistan is a very, very young country. 64% of our population is below 32. When I said 80 million people are below 30, I was not lying, you know. So there's this deliberate exclusion of real youth voices from the policy processes. And that's where ET Pakistan is trying to bridge the gap, especially in terms of PV and peace work and other kinds of work that come into the umbrella. And after expanding and creating a critical mass, we will have more of a negotiating power with state authorities, with local politicians, and especially because this will be an election year for Pakistan, we feel that it is very important to engage with candidates, you know, so they can announce as a candidate that if they come to power, they will be legislating for laws and for policies that are more inclusive, you know, based on equality, gender equality, race equality. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Arisa, so in the recent months, your country has been going through a long electoral campaign, and then the recent elections, and we saw that young people were very engaged in the campaign, but also right after the results, and there has been some backlash. So I think this really shows also that it can be very challenging to be a young activist at the national level. And with this project, we've also tried to build a more of a regional network. Could you tell us how, in your view, can regional networks and this kind of cross-regional collaboration help strengthen and amplify youth voices?
Thank you, Maud. So let me just say that for the elections, I'm very happy that Extremely Together Philippines was involved. Like, our young leaders ran good governance campaigns. They went with a lot of young people, teaching them how to vote for the first time, bringing them to register for the elections, and they also held several seminars talking about what the government should look like, how it represents the people, and this was new, actually, to a lot of young people, and millions of young people, actually, in the Philippines came to vote for the first time. So I'm very happy about that. I'm not happy per se about the results of the elections, especially because it came on the heel of a lot of disinformation, a lot of hate speech, and I think that speaks about also the transforming context of violence and conflict. You know, it's no longer just, we no longer experience it just as violent extremism or terrorism. We experience it as what we see online, the political propaganda, the polarization of people, the hate speech. So it's evolving, definitely. And that's why Extremely Together is so important, because we do our work at the national level. And of course, we have all these challenges, and daily, you know, we even receive, you know, threats from communities around us, from the different government apparatus, and from other youth even, who think that, you know, the work that we do isn't valid or isn't good enough or is lacking. So it's nice to work, to see what is happening in other countries and to know that we're not alone. Because the work that we do, and as I would say this especially for young people that I've worked with, especially those living in areas of conflict, it's hard. It's very hard. They have to earn a living when they come from very lower middle class or even lower circumstances, but at the same time they want to make a difference, but they find it hard to do so because they have very little resources, and they operate in an environment of where there is conflict and where there is violence. So when they're able to connect with somebody from Pakistan or somebody from Switzerland, the Kofi Annan Foundation, and they see that other people are doing similar kind of work in other countries, it validates them. It makes them feel like they're really fighting for something. It makes them feel important. And this seems, you know, very idealistic of me saying these things, but it really has a lot of impact. I've been working in the PVE and peace building sector for about 10 years, but it was only in 2016 when I met Mr. Kofi Annan and started working with the Kofi Annan Foundation. And I would tell you, I wouldn't have any of the success I had today as a peace builder, as a young leader, if not for the validation that I got from Mr. Kofi Annan, from the Kofi Annan Foundation, from the EU. So this is a similar thing that we want to do on a global level with Extremely Together. And aside from that validation, I think that it was also quite surprising seeing that we learned so much from each other. Even though we have very different circumstances, Ali is having a totally different scenario in Pakistan, I'm having a totally different scenario in the Philippines, we actually encounter similar challenges. And what's nice about it is they come up with solutions that we haven't thought of, and we've come up with solutions that might inspire them in their other approaches to peace building and PVE. So it's really like whenever we have meetings, both physical and digital, it's like an explosion of ideas and creativity. And I think that also goes to show how much energy and innovativeness, you know, comes from young people, and that we should keep leveraging that as much as we can through Extremely Together and the other approaches that we want to do now and in the future.
Thank you. I would like to thank you all for your incredible expertise and the thought that you've shared with us. And I would like to now turn to you all to hear from you also. We are eager to exchange with you if you have impressions or comments or questions. The floor is yours. Can you just introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Matilda Fleming. I'm from Search for Common Ground, and I led the campaign for 2250 back in the days as a youth activist. And it's always wonderful to be sort of part of you know, seeing the YPS agenda evolve. You were talking about sort of the move that is happening, but from policy to practice, and how there's so much work still to be done on national action plans and so forth. I wanted to reflect a bit upon So back in 2015, when the first resolution was adopted, it very much came about on the heel of very active CVE discussions at the UN. And on the one hand, sort of campaigning for the agenda, we tried to make use of that, while also trying to make sure that we were not securitizing young people. And I think it's important also in a conversation like this to say that the YPS agenda, the Youth, Peace and Security agenda, is not PVE. I mean, PVE is one aspect of it, but it's a much larger agenda, right? So, I mean, the global discussion has moved on since. There's less of this policy obsession with CV, perhaps, today than there was back in the days. But yeah, I wanted to maybe, especially from Ali and Arisa, hear a bit about how you deal with the securitization of young people, which sort of PVE type of programming could be experienced to bring in some contexts, as far as I'm aware. Thanks.
It doesn't really help. I mean, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It is counterproductive. It is simply counterproductive. We have seen, for example, in Pakistan, when terrorism has gone down by 95% in the last 3 years. So before that, over security measures really ended up radicalizing more youth. We had more youth becoming from extremists to radical terrorists in jails because they were profiled, because they belonged to a certain class of ethnic group, or went to a madrasa and they were profiled, and it was spiral of violence and viciousness that really didn't end. So when we talk about PVE, I think it should incline towards more of a softer peace building kind of an ideological approach than anything to do with security. When we talk about security, then we talk about hardcore. If we talk about security, we have to sometimes talk about foreign policy. And when we talk about foreign policy, then it's a maze, how foreign policies of many countries have impacted violent extremist narratives to spring up in many of the countries where it's a problem right now. So I wouldn't really go there. I think it's a big problem. I think we should have a very clear bifurcation between security issues and youth, PVE and peace building issues. And these are different kinds of fields altogether. Yeah.
And just to add on that, I do agree with Ali. For the work that we've done through Extremely Together, I think one good thing is that we've been very obsessed about the kind of values and the kind of character that the movement represents. So when we talk about Extremely Together, I mean, it's in the name. It's not just that we're preventing violent extremism as a youth movement and in different countries, but that we're doing it together. So I think even the bringing of people together for any common purpose, not necessarily PVE, not necessarily security, even for climate change, even for social justice, even for public health with the pandemic, even for education, is already really a big deal for us. And I think it represents the next step, the next evolution in the Extremely Together movement that we're creating. And that's, we have a very potent youth network right now that's not only interested in peace building and PVE, but is interested to actually reach development. I mean, at the core of it, in the countries that we come from, people don't just want peace. They want a house, they want a job, they want fulfillment. And that's for us the next step. Yeah, okay. Even in the Philippines, number of terrorist attacks have gone down, violent extremist groups, numbers have dwindled, but we can't survive on just peace and security alone. We need to work on the next step, and we need to really build from this.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Natalie Domas. I'm from Conciliation Resources. Going off of your last comments about essentially looking at the next steps for Extremely Together, I was thinking about how a lot of your comments actually resonate to what happens in other countries such as the United States, for instance. There's a lot of violent extremism that's happening that's targeting, other racial groups, there's religious divisions. So I think looking at, maybe as a next step, how your experiences that you've gotten from your countries, and obviously the wealth of knowledge that you have, how that can actually be shared in other countries that maybe donors such as the EU haven't really been looking at, such as here in Europe and then also in the United States, because I think it's not just an issue that happens, in the Philippines, in Bangladesh, or also, on the African continent. It's something that happens all over. So I was wondering if maybe, that could be a possible next step, because definitely I think you would find that the themes are cross-cutting throughout, especially in countries like the United States. Yeah, just kind of an open question.
We have been discussing this issue for the last few days that we have been here, that there is a link between Islamist violent extremism and far-right extremism that is springing up in parts of the Western world. Even the narratives of some of the narratives that I've personally researched that white supremacist or far-right extremists use are borrowed from extremist contents of the Islamic world. You know what I'm saying? It's like a tennis match. There's a gap. At present, no one is really dealing with the cross-pollination of how these radical ideas are radicalizing more people, how they're using the radical content from the Islamic world as a justification for what is being done in the US and many other parts, and similarly how content from these far-right groups is being promoted as a propaganda tool by Islamist groups in the Eastern or the Muslim world. And I think a sharing of best practices is a need of the hour. I feel more than just sharing, there should be programmatic synergies, because these two issues are really linked close together. Even in the case of Pakistan, if you know about India, there's a rise of this very violent Hindutva version of extremism in India. It has impacted the Islamist movements in Pakistan, and vice versa, So there's a gap there, and with international donors and international stakeholders, I feel this gap should immediately be addressed. Otherwise, it will just become a source of content and a good tennis match between Roger Federer and, what have you. So this should be addressed. Yeah.
So I don't actually come from the development sector. I actually finished with a degree in engineering. But, as a sort of stranger to the kind of work that we've been doing through Chris and Extremely Together, I've found that sometimes the work is too siloed. When I'm looking at violent extremism, terrorism, and all these things, I find that there are so many things that really point to the same things in polarization, in the divisiveness we see on social media, in hate speech, in the different, even political propaganda that we're seeing through the elections and different activities. But I guess what I want to say is that we have to break down those silos. And in the future, this isn't just about PVE anymore. This is really about building more social cohesion. And I know that sounds like a buzzword, but I think that's really it, because we're evolving as societies. We have more migration, we have more movements across us, and all of the forces that we're seeing right now need to be dealt with in very similar manners, no matter what country you're from. So it's part of the work that we want to do in the future. And more concretely, I think to answer your question, Extremely Together actually started first as a small group of 10 young leaders from different countries. So we do have young leaders representing Europe. And we have done some work on more global aspects of PVE and peace building. But recently, since we've been more focused on building in depth on each country, now is the time, I guess, we have a better opportunity to kind of take another step back and say, okay, what can we do on a global level? So I guess that's why we're here today as well, to share this with you and to hear your ideas. And I also want to give the mic to either Candida or Natasha, because I think from the Europe perspective, they'd also be able to share a lot.
It's a very good question, because I think the first thing that springs to mind is, looking at being in the development sector, that implies an external focus. We work together also with the Kofi Annan Foundation with Extremely Together chapters in East Africa, and listening to the reading the recommendations at the outcomes from the work in South and Southern Asia. I mean, there's so many best practices to share, and I think really coming back to also the sign challenge, I mean, whenever it comes to youth or youth participation, youth engagement, but also PVE, YPS, I mean, there's not one size fits all, but there is a lot of foundational work you can really apply to the different contexts. And I think that's really what the Kofi Annan Foundation and the Extremely Together chapters have really kind of, you know, done. Looking at the different chapters and the work that's been done, you know, you can see so many similarities. The outcomes might be different and the learnings might be different, but there are so many similarities in terms of how do you address, you know, structural challenges or barriers. You know, that doesn't really change. The structural barrier itself might be different, hopefully, from country to country, but it's still there, and how do you approach it? So I think there's so much potential in sharing best practices and going above that. However, I also think the challenge is when you want to take something from the development sector, at least with, you know, that external focus, development partners, development cooperation, and twist it or turn it around and look internally, then it's suddenly out of my hands. It's suddenly out of the hands of my ministry, because then it becomes national. And then it's, you know, the minister of, or ministry of, I don't know, defense, culture, whoever works with it on a national scale. So I think the question, and I think that goes for a lot of policy areas, how do we bridge the work and the learning outcomes we get in development work, and how do we get all that learning and take it into our national sectors? Because I think there's so much wonderful, brilliant work done, and especially in terms of YPS and young people, in development cooperation with external partners, but we don't really know how to bridge it and take that with us back home, so to say.
I might have an answer to that, or attempt to anyway. You know, for me personally, and I mentioned this before, it's really important to hear the experience from the ground. But then there's this challenge of how to bridge the gap between our member states really and their national policies. I actually see that bridge building as a role for the United Nations, because when you take the country experiences all the way to New York essentially, where they already have the institutionalized youth forum, but also, you know, they're talking about youth issues all around the world. Like I worked on you know, when we negotiated the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, 14. That's when the negotiations were. I was there, so we had actually a special sessions with youth representatives on every single SDGs that we were discussing at the time. So, and then obviously from that global level, the states as the governments, you know, take it back home. Now, obviously, there needs to be some implementation checks and dialogue between both the youth communities and the policy level, essentially, or the government level. Which I think might be the missing piece often. But there's, you know, I think we're progressing in the right direction, hopefully. But you know, since I'm having the word, I would actually like to ask the question also about what are the next steps for you guys, because one thing I was really struck by one of the results that you mentioned, that you trained 2,700 young people. I think that's amazing work. And you know, one thing that we're struggling theoretically is how to keep these young people engaged. You know, because we all know that when we reach a certain age, we have many responsibilities, and it's kind of growing. So, but we want to keep harnessing that potential, that work that has been done on the capacity building. So how do you see that? What can be done better, perhaps there? Thank you.
I'll start with this. So it's a very, very difficult question, the question of sustainability and sustaining the interest of young people who, you know, are easily distracted. But we've tried to address that issue a bit, especially since we had a 2-year project held over a pandemic. And I think number one, it was really working with established organizations. So we worked a lot with existing youth organizations, universities, other academic institutions, local government units. We wanted our work to kind of be anchored on their organization so that the capacities we helped them to build and the accomplishments we've helped them to accomplish during the course of the project isn't just embedded to them individually, but is embedded in the organization. So for instance, with our partnership now with one local government unit in Davao region, we've been able to kind of pioneer a PVE project that they were very interested to continue by themselves. So it's like planting a seed that they can plant for themselves again and again. And I think the second is to have as many touch points as possible and, basically to be annoying. So in the work that we've done in the Philippines, for instance, we actually trained over 1,000 young leaders. And in order to keep them engaged even after the training program, we invited them to a lot of digital forums. We had mental health webinars. We had just short catch-ups where they would meet in restaurants or just, on the streets, had to just meet each other in person. We had a grand conference at the end of our program, and it wasn't really a conference that had a lot of speakers. Honestly, 70% of it was musical performances because we really wanted to just entertain them and give a lasting impression. And now, as we're reaching the end of our project, we've been reaching out to them, giving them materials, excuse me, such as the one we distributed today. We've kept in touch with them on social media. We have Facebook groups, we have WhatsApp groups, and I honestly don't think that it's like an exact science, something we've done, but I think young people can be busy for a period of time, like if they're having exams, but then after a few months they get interested again and they get back, or maybe they're busy because of work, but then say next year they find that this is more aligned with the profession they're looking for, so they get interested again. So basically, never lose touch and never give up. So that's the second. And I think the third and last one is to appeal to their own sense of what they want to do in the future. Because all of the work that we do, it seems pretty selfless, Like, okay, we want to build a peaceful society. We want to reduce violent extremism. We want less combatants. We want to have security in the Philippines. But we have to be very good at explaining to them so that it's in their interest to pursue this. So we tell them that if you have a more peaceful community, you'll have more jobs. If we were lower on the global terrorism index, more people will invest in us and we'll have better livelihoods, possibly. We'll have more opportunities for you to go to school or for you to pursue your career or your passion. So that's one thing that we're still working on. But I think based on the work we've done on Extremely Together, the response has been overwhelmingly positive.
Thank you. So now I would just like to, for us to hear a short video message from the third partner who couldn't be with us today, which is GSURF. So for the concluding remarks, we will hear from Leela Shumiki Logan, who is the head of portfolio management at GSURF.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to provide a closing remark for this very important event. Thank you for the young people who have participated in this important project. We are proud of our partnership with Rupantar, an extraordinary Bangladeshi NGO, the Kofi Annan Foundation, and the European Union, which has financed this joint program. We believe that this is the right way to leverage resources, expertise, and knowledge to prevent violent extremism and increase youth engagement in the youth and peace and security agenda. GSURF works in 15 countries in Europe, Africa, and Asia, and with 230 local partners. The important work supporting digital literacy and critical thinking skills that this project aimed to achieve has resonated. Lessons learned from this project, where young people were not just active recipients, but active creators of the project, have confirmed that if we want to achieve through youth participation in preventing violent extremism, we need to allow young people to build and drive them. We need to trust them and give them the space to create, innovate, and flourish. GSURF, as a global organization, is well positioned to ensure that young people have space, that they are connected to local and national authorities, and that their agency is loud and clear. Similar initiatives are currently ongoing elsewhere in GSURF partner countries like Nigeria, Kenya, but also Kosovo and Albania. Online engagement has no boundaries. Young people and us, partners, learn from each other to identify what works well and what needs to be strengthened. Peace corners, for example, are excellent platforms where young people can exchange their views. Digital literacy is a skill that can be acquired but needs to be driven by young people themselves and facilitated by organizations such as Rupantar. Art, poetry, and drama creation and broadcasting are excellent ways to express frustration and find new ways to critical thinking and constructive criticism. Let me give you a quote from one of our beneficiaries. Peace and harmony means coexistence without violence. It is very necessary for the growth and development of the nation. Peace, harmony, and tolerance can help in getting inner satisfaction. And the best way to express and to circulate the thought of this satisfaction is to ascertain narratives. Therefore, the essay and poem competition is certainly an excellent way out to achieving this target. So, what does it take to make youth inclusion in peace and security a greater reality? The topic that you have also discussed earlier. In our views, it requires three things. First, we need organizations such as GSURF, the Kofi Annan Foundation, Rupantar, who recognize the need for meaningful youth engagement and who have the expertise to facilitate it. Second, we need like-minded donors, such as the European Union, to provide resources and entrust its partners. And third, we need the trust and investment in the young people themselves who can drive this agenda forward. I urge other organizations and policymakers to refrain from the tokenistic engagement of young people and provide them with meaningful support, space, and opportunities to grow. They will lead us in the coming years. It is time now to invest with them in their and our future that is free of terrorism and violent extremism, and where peace, tolerance, and pluralism is a matter of principle and not a privilege. I thank you.
So let's end on this reminder from Lila that it's time now to invest with young people and in young people for a more peaceful future. I would like to thank every one of you who have joined us today on behalf of the Kofi Annan Foundation and the partners. And I would like to invite you to continue this conversation over lunch, which is being served just over there. And it's raining, so I think it's the perfect time to have lunch and discuss this. Thank you very much.